Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's interview. I'm Jen Bunk. I am a career coach for technical managers and founder of the People Stack. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Marcus Blankenship. He is a technical leader, consultant, and trainer, and also author of Habits That Ruin Your Technical Team. Welcome, Marcus.
Thanks for having me, Jen.
I'm super excited to talk to you today, and also super excited to talk about this topic, becoming your boss's biggest ally, because this is for a number of reasons. This is a topic that comes up a lot. You know, we talk about managing your team, managing the folks who are on your team and maybe across your team, but then inevitably the question comes up, well, what about my boss? I want to have a great relationship with my boss. And arguably the relationship with someone's boss is going to be one of the most important relationships at work, right? Like we hear all the time, people don't leave organizations, they leave supervisors. So I'm sure you've heard stories of, yeah, I left because my boss is a jerk. I left because, you know, my relationship with my boss was so rocky. So we're going to get into the hows, like how we do this, but let's first start with the why. I'm curious what your thoughts are, Marcus, on why this topic is so important to discuss.
One of my favorite quotes, I bet you might have even heard it, comes from a psychologist named David Day, who does a lot of research around this particular topic. And he says that the relationship one has with their boss is a lens through which the entire work experience is viewed. And I like that because I think everything that I have experienced and people that I talk to, they feel certain ways about their work, about their products, about their time, about their company. But oftentimes, all of that is actually reflective of how they feel about their boss. And when we kind of dive in, we learn that the work isn't that frustrating. It's their boss that's frustrating. We learn that it's not the company mission they hate. It's that their boss drives them crazy, right? So like the way you feel about your boss, shockingly enough, and some people don't like to hear this, it impacts how you feel about your work. And this affects motivation, this affects enthusiasm. Are you going to go the extra mile? Are you going to come in, stay the extra 15 minutes and make sure something's done really well? It turns out that I think I have this idea that we're built for loyalty, but we are all like dying to have a boss that inspires loyalty that we can be loyal to. And I think this is obviously a lesson for those of you that are leaders thinking about your team downwards, because it could be you're someone's worst boss ever. And the same team, you could be someone's best boss ever. So I think that this idea of becoming your boss's greatest ally is so important, not just because it affects how we perceive our work, but because there are things we can do. And I'm not talking about sucking up here. This isn't about just getting promoted and looking good. I don't want to talk about playing politics. I want to talk about changing the relationship you have with your boss in such a way that you and they also, you know, it's very bidirectional and reciprocal, that you both get something out of this improved relationship. I have done the best work of my life working for a boss that not only did I like, but I felt respected by, and that I felt like we were allies. But I have also done the worst work of my life under bosses that I felt like didn't care about me. And so therefore I didn't really care about them.
Yeah, and I want to get into those stories a little bit of you managing those relationships with those bosses. And I appreciate, though, you sharing what you mean by ally, because that's actually what I was going to ask you, so that we're kind of on the same page here. So it sounds like, to kind of summarize and put in my own words what you were saying, is that it's really about that reciprocal relationship, that we're in this together, and how can we help one another make the team perform the best they can, be as engaged as they can, serve the company's goals and mission. How can we do this together instead of separately, or at worst, like as like competitors of one another? So that's what you're talking about when you mean ally.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of situations in which sometimes bosses feel threatened by high performing employees. You can be a fantastic employee, but if your boss perceives that his or her job is at risk because you're so good, that can start to erode their confidence. That can start to make them or tempt them. Maybe they don't act on it, but color their interactions with you such that they're tempted to marginalize you, to give you work that's not the best work, the most impactful work. I have actually early in my career felt threatened by a senior programmer who was much better than me, and I started to wonder, like, well, maybe I'm just going to be fired. When will everyone notice that this person should be doing my job? It's an immature thinking, but we're all at different points in the spectrum. So like nobody's perfect. And yeah, I think it's about aligning with your boss and being their partner in success for both of you and ultimately for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to hear your story. So story time a little bit, because I think this is a great way to transition into the how. How do you do this? So what can you tell us? Do you have a story that you could tell about from your previous life when you were an employee and you had a boss where you managed that relationship and either it worked out really well and so that's what's to do, or maybe it didn't work out so well, or you tried some things that didn't work and we can learn from those mistakes?
Well, a little of both. How's that? So I had one particular boss. I worked for him for 14 years through 3 or 4 promotions. Every time he got promoted, he sort of gave me his old job. So, but we had a really rocky start. We had the kind of rocky start where, boy, I don't know if I want to admit this, but I was put on an action plan repeatedly and told in 2 weeks, we're firing you if your performance doesn't change. This is not usually the kind of situation where you think my boss and I are aligned. So we had to work through that. But that actually, I think, the difficult part, recognizing it was difficult for both of us, once we got through that, we started to establish a pattern of mutual respect, and I started performing better. Now, along the way, I think I'd been working for him for about 2 years. And I remember reflecting one day, like I have a job where I'm a programmer and I get to sit relatively uninterrupted and work. This is pretty great. He is a cubicle 6 cubicles down and he is never at his desk. He is always in meetings. He's got this giant binder he's always carrying around of all his notes. No one had a laptop back in like 95 or 96. They were prohibitively expensive. He was always on his BlackBerry. And I remember thinking, just like, he looks miserable. He's harried. He's exhausted. And so one day I took a risk. And I think you could probably understand why it's a risk here in a minute. I remember asking him, and this is at a point where I felt like I was pretty competent and I was basically doing my job well. I was getting good feedback from him. My customers were happy. So I took a risk and I said, how can I make your job easier? And you might think that he said, well, great, here's X and Y and Z and get to work. No, this is not going to happen the first time. It didn't for me, at least. He looked at me, his jaw dropped, and he was like, what do you mean? And I said, your work looks really hard and I don't understand it, but I would love to make your job easier somehow, even in some way. Yeah. The next thing he said, was, no, do your job. That's the thing you can do. Okay, great. So the first key here in this story is persistence. I did not stop asking. We had a weekly one-on-one. I just started asking that at the end of every one-on-one. This week, how could I make your job easier? Finally, he believed. This is my hypothesis. My theory is I had to ask enough so that he knew I wasn't just casually asking, that I really seemed to want to know. And then he wanted to know why. Why do you want to know this? Because the why is always important. Sure. And I said, because I would like to understand selfishly what you do. Someday I might want to do what you do. But beyond that, I also would like to help you be more effective. And frankly, spending 15 minutes a day at your desk and the rest of the time in meetings, you look like you're working an awful lot. Okay, so there was the why. A little bit that benefited me, a little bit that benefited him. And in the big picture, we're all going to do better. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But no, I don't have anything. 4 or 5 more times. Another month goes by, and finally he says, you know, there is something. I've got a mountain of resumes. Do you want to do an initial screening of them? Oh,
Yeah.
sure. By the way, resumes back then came on paper. So
it was an actual pile, not just a
it was an
virtual
actual pile. So he was like, here's a pile of resumes. Just separate them into the ones you think have a chance it's being successful here, and the ones you think we should reject, and put a sticky note on each one as to why. And but that idea, that was kind of the beginning, that question of how can I make your job easier?
Yeah.
And then persistently asking over and over and over again. Maybe I just wore him down. I don't know. But I think he had to learn to trust that I don't want to use, okay, so this was kind of a political company, and there were people that would try and kind of screw other people. It was sometimes my benefit was your loss, and right. So some of those companies exist. So I think he had to feel safe that I wasn't going to turn around and say, well, why is the boss delegating his work to me, or play some game like that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So and now when I got this assignment, I was excited and nervous. So I sat down, I did my very best, I turned it in, and you might think that the next week I got another assignment. Nope, we had to go a few more weeks. But again, the next time it was, I'm thinking about hiring this person. Would you do a phone screen? Right. So in our case, it seemed like hiring was an area that took a lot of time for him because he had to deal with all the internal management and project management, everything. And so this was an area that he would slowly started giving me bigger and bigger pieces. The next thing I know, I was scheduling interview, then I was doing initial phone screens. And frankly, hiring was a wonderful skill that he taught me by doing it in little pieces and doing it alongside him.
Yeah.
And we got to have a lot of deeper conversations about how to do it well. And I think we built a deeper rapport because of that. I perceived that I moved into his in-group because he was very much the kind of manager who believed everyone should be kept at arm's length.
Yeah.
That was his style. That's what I think he viewed equity as. It was to be fair, you kept everyone at arm's length. But somehow I weaseled my way in a little closer.
Mm-hmm. And so what happened? so in this particular job, did you end up getting more promotions, or is that kind of where it stayed, where it was like you had this happy relationship where you would help every once in a while?
No, I think it was this particular quality of wanting to be my boss's ally continued to bloom. It bloomed. And again, I started at about 18 months into my career. I worked with him for 14 years. So I started doing this fairly early on. I had to gain competency in my own work. Sure. I had to show him that I wasn't going to be the red flag, the difficulty, the hot spot. And we had a rough patch in the first 6 months. Yeah. But once I got over that, and basically I showed to myself and to him that I could do my job as assigned, asking to take on more work persistently and in new and innovative ways, I think built the relationship that then he continued to promote me. As he got promoted, I eventually became the assistant manager of the department. I hired hundreds of people. I did all the hiring, all the interviewing, all the firing, all the mentoring, as well as budgets and planning. And I managed multiple teams. And I really think it was our relationship that wasn't just my performance. It was our relationship that enabled me to be able to have an opportunity to try those things.
Okay. And so what would you say would be the main things, maybe 2 or 3 things that you learned from that experience?
I learned that when your boss trusts you, there's almost no substitute for that quality of trust. And I learned that I don't have to. So for all the other bosses I'd worked at, I'd taken the approach of, I'll do my job here until you tell me something different. And if there's not quite enough work to do, I'll just stretch that out. Frankly, I'll take an hour's worth of work and I can make it last 3 hours. Like, come on, we can polish the furniture. We can, but that was really me, like being quite selfish. What I learned was that you can take the initiative with your supervisor to have a better relationship. And in fact, if there are folks right now who might be listening saying, you talk about one-on-ones, we don't even have one-on-ones.
Yeah.
I'd challenge you. Why aren't you scheduling one-on-ones? Why aren't you asking for one-on-ones? Now you're nodding. Do you suggest the same approach?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking about, how this might apply to situations for managers, right? Where you might be a manager and then your boss is a manager of managers. And you're thinking, okay, well, I'm not an individual contributor anymore. So how is this relevant? This is relevant all the way up the chain, right? And it's also, again, sort of get us to think about, we care about our team so much that we spend to focus 150% of our energy on how we make our team better and how we care and how the caring and feeding of our team. But what about the caring and feeding of the relationship with your boss? And so that's what the purpose of doing this today is. And so that's why it's so unfortunate when I hear over and over again, oh yeah, I do one-on-ones with my team all the time. Once a week I meet with all of them. But then when you ask, okay, well, what about with your boss? How often do you meet with your boss? He or she doesn't do that. It's not there. They like more, informal kind of conversations, or he's too busy, or she just doesn't do that. But it's like, hey, that's a little bit off balance there, because you want to manage your relationship with your boss the same way that you manage your relationship with your team. So yeah, go out there and suggest and do it and say, you know what, I want to meet once a week and let's try this, because I really do think that it's gonna help. So absolutely agree with you there.
Yeah, you may have to even be creative. My boss and I would do lunch. We'd do breakfast. We'd grab coffee. Sometimes we'd go grab a beer. He was very busy. He was very, very busy in comparison to how busy I was as a programmer. I continued this practice of how can I make your job easier when I became a team lead, when I moved to a different team, when I became the assistant manager of the department. Clearly, I was in his in-group. He had told me, when I leave, and I won't be here forever, you're going to get this job. Now, due to politics and other things, that didn't happen, but I appreciated the sentiment. I know that was his intention.
Sure.
But I think there's another aspect here. It's not just about my career. What I found shocking, you're going to be totally shocked as this, is if we looked across all the teams, I believe my team was better paid, had more flexibility, had better equipment, got better projects. I was more able to advocate for them. Mm-hmm. I was never understaffed. And so all of this hinges on the trust. When I would come to my boss and say, I absolutely need to hire 3 more people, he'd say, great, put it in a proposal and get it to me and we'll get it done. When I'd say, you know what, we've got these underpowered laptops, we've got to get new ones. Okay, fine. Like, there was not a distrust that caused someone to say, well, you've got to prove it and why, and well, when did we look at, blah, blah, blah. I really believe that my team directly benefited from the relationship with my boss. Also, we never suffered a layoff. Other teams sometimes got cut. We were able to shuffle people around. So my ability to advocate for teams was stronger because of my relationship with my boss.
Yeah. But it needs to be said that this is something that benefited your career as well. And so there is that balance, right? Where it's like, I like to see it as like a byproduct, right? That like, hey, I have a better relationship with my boss, and my team is benefiting from it, and the organization is clearly benefiting from it as well. And hey, cool, I get a promotion as well. I get to be, on more valuable projects, more exciting projects, and probably making some more money along the way as well. But you get to feel great about that when it's like, hey, if that wasn't it wasn't the reason that I was doing it, but that like, yeah, you get rewarded when you do that and when you build that trust. And so that's another reason to become your boss's biggest ally, is because you're gonna get those more rewards along the way, which feels good, and then that's gonna feed that motivation cycle and keep it going. Otherwise, you feel stuck. You feel like, am I going to be a programmer forever, or am I going to be an assistant manager forever? and you don't
Right.
get those opportunities to really shine and to really make a bigger contribution.
And a lot of times, especially if you're leading a team, you're judged on the performance of your team. So I look at it, there is a direct correlation between how well my team performs and how happy and motivated they are. So if I can get them 2 monitors, doesn't that sound crazy? We were not allowed to have 2 monitors. That was a special request. I had to get people 2 17-inch, ooh, that's huge, monitors. It was my goal. And I worked really hard. And but those are the sorts of things that my team saw me doing. And I think there's a motivational aspect, which again, as the manager, you get rewarded for your team's hard work, because that's the work of a manager, is motivating and aligning and organizing, controlling your team. That's the work you do. So don't think about this as not the, oh, I shouldn't get a big raise for it. You should, because you've created an environment. So part of that is your team watching you advocate for them, your team noticing that you are going to bat for them, and that when you go to bat, you may not win them all, but you'll win a lot more. It's not about logic. It's about relationship 90% of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's definitely a pull quote there. It's not about logic. It's about relationships. Because we are social humans. We are social humans. We are social beings. That's one of our core needs as human beings, is to feel that connection and to have those awesome relationships. And one of the things, like if we were to do a word cloud of our conversation thus far, I think the word trust would definitely be in bigger font. That's definitely one of the things that I'm picking up along the way as well as we're talking. And you know what? And almost in lots of other conversations that I've had about managing in general, that trust is so key. So I want to go on and talk a little bit more about the hows of the tips around, being your boss's biggest ally. But one other point that I want to make before we move on that I wrote down is, as you were telling your story, was that persistence. How can I make your job easier? That persistence is really important. And the wheels started turning. Is like, well, why was it that you needed to ask your boss in particular that question so many times? And certainly it sounds like the politics played into it as well. It played into it. But I think maybe another piece of it, and maybe it wasn't the case in your case, but it could be in other cases, that delegation is a skill that's not a lot of people are good at and don't even want to deal with. Like, they just rather do all the work and have the big pile of resumes to go through than, oh my God, delegate, right? So it's almost like by asking over and over again in a compassionate way, no, I really do want to help. Please tell me, that it's like, okay, I'm going to say no now because I'm not sure. Or maybe in the beginning it was because I'm not trust what you're up to here, Marcus. So then there comes the why. And, oh, okay, so Marcus does want to help. All right. But, oh gosh, I have no idea. And then the wheels start turning a little bit more and like, okay, well, what's one thing that I can give him that's relatively easy that I think he'd be good at? Here you go. And then that's like a trial run. And then you get better at delegating as you do it more and more. So it was almost like giving your boss the opportunity to practice those delegation skills. Like, you were creating that space to do that when he may not have done that before. So there's another benefit of being your boss's biggest ally, is you get to teach and show your boss how to delegate and do that in a safe kind of way.
I think that's so brilliant. Absolutely. And everybody who's listening here probably wishes they could delegate something, but they think it's going to be easier to do it myself. It's going to be faster. I know it'll get done right. The time it takes to train someone else is part of delegation, right? You can't just throw a task at someone, especially a task that's important, without any context or training, and assume that they're just going to knock it out of the park. So I do have other tips on this. One tip, I'll just kind of jump to that real quick. If your boss appears to be hesitant to delegate, think about how you can make it easier. Consider a do it with me approach. Say, can I join you for an interview? Say, could we just sit down and look at budgets together? Because I'm interested, because I want to learn, but also because I wonder if another perspective and talking through it might have benefits. Most bosses would agree that there is a benefit. They work managers work so often in isolation, and it is a self-isolation. If you're listening to this right now and that sounds right, just imagine how great it would be if members of your team took an interest in your work and said, you don't have to do all those things by yourself. We are here to help you be successful in the same way as you're here to help us be successful. There's kind of a relief in having an ally, because now, I mean, my boss used to call me in and we would start, eventually, we talked about everything: personal, professional, political in the company, political in the country. He was from India, so we had cultural and language barriers as well. I had to learn to tune my ear, to be frank, to have long technical and conversations of all kind with someone from India. I didn't understand him very well at first. And so I had to be honest enough to say, could you repeat that? I really want to understand.
Sure.
But I think a do it with me approach, where you are not just saying, give it to me and let me run with it yet, but saying, could we pair on this? It doesn't really take that person more time. And it allows you to have an opportunity to learn. And it allows you to say, well, next time I think I could do more on my own. So it's a measured delegation. Anyway, that's one tip.
That's a great strategy. It's the how about we strategy. How about we do this together? You start it, you test the waters. That's great. So that's a great question, a great thing to bring up, a statement to bring up, like say during one-on-ones. How about we do this together? That kind of thing. And we talked about another question, which was the key question: how can I make your job easier? So let's talk more about the how. And I think the best way to kind of frame this is in the context of, say, one-on-ones and asking questions. So we talked a little bit about one-on-ones and just even like how to get your boss to do one-on-ones with you if he or she doesn't do that. But what other tips, what other strategies would you share, Marcus, that would be helpful in that context to slowly but surely over time, through that series of conversations, through that persistence, to get your boss to be your biggest ally?
Okay, you've got to think about this like the show Survivor. Okay, the show Survivor. Maybe you've never seen it.
I watched it once, I think.
Okay, well, so this is gonna be a tough conversation. I'll figure out a different framing for this. But when you ask to come close to your boss, you're asking them to trust you. When they give you something to do and you bring it back, that increased trust. When you are saying, how can I make your job easier? You are saying, I would like to be closer to you. I would like to be your ally. Now, a private ally is valuable. A public ally, though, especially in a large company, is 10x as valuable.
Sure.
And so one of the things that my boss and I did after we had been building a private ally relationship, you might say we took that public. It wasn't like a big sign or a banner, but let's be honest, people are going to notice. And some people are not going to like it. Just being honest. People, your peers may be jealous. They may say you're sucking up, you're being teacher's pet. Nobody likes that kind of behavior. Someone who looks better than them, if they perceive that they may think, well, if you're in his in-group, if you have a good relationship, I can't. Some people have that mentality, right? Departmentally, not everyone else in the organization is going to be a fan of your boss. That's just the truth. And so therefore, if you are aligned with that person, then they may be aligned against you. These are the realities. But let's be frank. It's not much of an ally if when someone else engages in gossip and negative talk and extreme criticism behind closed doors, that you just let it go by, or that in public you sort of allow those things to happen. So there's you are definitely, you're risking something by becoming your boss's ally, because other people will view you as on his team. And I mean that metaphorically, not hierarchically, right? Does this kind of make sense of like, if you're with him and I'm against him or her, then I'm against you as well. And I'm going to actively block you and your career because you're, and frankly, I had some of those situations. But that's kind of the trust. Sorry, that's kind of the test of an ally. Does someone stand up and defend you? Do they offer frank criticism behind closed doors? Do they work in the best interest of the department and the boss together, especially in political environments? And at times, the environment can be so intense. And I remember feeling so caught in the middle between someone who I wanted to like me, even a vice president over in another division. And I thought, man, if that person was my ally, then imagine what would happen. But sometimes you have to choose your allies. And if you're aligned with one, it doesn't mean you can be aligned with everybody. I remember one time my boss, very specifically, because he understood politics better than I did, and he said, I want you to always give me completely honest feedback, but I would like you to do that in private. When we're behind closed doors, you can say anything to me. You can tell me I'm crazy, I'm stupid, I'm not thinking, whatever. But when we're in a meeting together, when we're in front of my boss, I would like people to perceive that you support me. And we can disagree about ideas, but we need to support each other publicly. In a political environment, this was probably one of the biggest benefits that we both received. Yeah. Yes, some people didn't like it, but the reality was I viewed that as part of being an ally. And I really like your framing of ally, because I think it wasn't until we actually did this interview and we're talking that I would have called it that. I don't think I would have called it friend. We were never friends. We didn't socialize. We were extremely friendly. Yeah. And we talked about many aspects of our personal life. But I didn't call him up on Saturday and say, you want to go bike riding. That wasn't our relationship. But we had a deep, professional, bidirectional trust relationship. And I think we were each other's allies. And that was highly beneficial to my career. Yeah. So I don't want people to think that it's all roses. At times there will be hard conversations, and other people, like I said, they may be jealous, and you will have to face that.
Yeah, and that is really a great reminder that unfortunately in certain organizational contexts that's going to happen. I think it's unfortunate that happens, because I've been lucky enough, if luck is the word, to work in organizational environments that were not necessarily always competitive. Yeah, there was a little bit of politics and whatever, but it was always more collaborative. And I think that's just because what I'm drawn to, honestly. I never wanted to work in a hyper competitive or a hyper political atmosphere. But it is unfortunate that kind of thing sometimes happens. Like you had mentioned, like, well, if he's in his in-group, then I can't be in his in-group too, right? That's sort of scarcity mindset of there's only so much trust and relationship to go around. Like, well, no, how about we switch it to more of a mindset of abundance, where it's, okay, actually, we can all get along. We can absolutely do that. And there doesn't have to be this infighting or anything like that. That would be obviously the ideal situation. And I think it's, if you walk around with that in your mind, and that's your mindset, then I think it's much easier to sort of say, okay, I can appreciate how other people may not see it that way, but I don't. Like, I'm not here to fight you. I'm not here to get into political battles with you or steal something from you. I'm actually here to help you do that. And then if you create that sort of those opportunities and those relationships for that to happen, then yeah, everybody has the opportunity to be in the quote unquote in group and to create those relationships. But if people want to look at it as no, we're competing against one another, which is always just so strange to me. Like, yeah, I work for the same organization. Like, what? It's not a competition. If there's ever competition, think about the true competitors, right? It's okay for the folks at Apple and Microsoft to think that they're competing with one another, maybe in a friendly way. But anyway, I think that's a really nice reminder that it's not all sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and hearts and smiley faces, that there are, being aware of the political aspects behind it that's an excellent point. And the other thing, the thing that you had brought up there in terms of like tactics and strategies was, I was going to write it down and then I forgot what it was. You were talking about, I lost it. It'll come back. There was there were a couple of tactics in there. So let's get to that, and then we'll get along that mindset. Like what? So what does this mean? What do you do? How do you think strategically in terms of keeping this in mind? There's going to be political realities.
Sure.
How do we do this? How do we manage it?
Sure. So again, I think we start to offer help in areas that are outside. This is what I did when I said, I'd love to help you. I'd love to understand more about your work. I'd love, you seem very busy. What can I take on? Varying the question a little bit, right? And so we're offering to do it with them. Clearly, by the way, what the benefit to you is that you're going to learn the job that you want. Or you're going to find out, I don't want that job at all. But for me, I also got to learn the job before I did it. Most organizations want to promote people who already know how to do the job, right? We'll give you the job and then maybe you'll get the title. So in this case, I got to ease into a lot of aspects of the job. The second part, I think, is having, over time, creating a meta conversation, a conversation about what are we talking about? How is this working? How can I help you more? Our work is not just producing software. Our work is also producing an environment where both of us can be effective together. And so that conversation is really interesting to me now. Oftentimes we're too busy to have it. My boss would say, I just don't have time to like think about your weirdness. Like he would just, and we'd say that with a smile, but I would say, I want us to work better together. It's very important for me to feel safe, for us to know that we can trust each other. What did I do this week that made you wonder if you could trust me? What did I do this week that affirmed that you can trust me? Those were new conversations with him in a lot of ways. I knew absolutely he wasn't having them with anybody else because the look on his face was like, this is weird. But he took a risk as I was taking a risk. I think he saw that these risk-taking activities mean that I was really sincere and that that he could trust me to take small risks and open up.
Yeah.
When you ask your boss, what's hard this week? What are you avoiding? What are you really not looking forward to? If they tell you anything besides, nope, everything's fine, you have a pretty great relationship with your boss, and you should continue to build on that. So don't think that he or she is doing that with everybody. My guess is they're doing that with you because you're asking about it.
Yeah, that is a hard thing to share. And so the thing that I was actually thinking about was, okay, flipping it around. If you're a manager, share with your team what's hard. Talk just preemptively, like don't make them ask. Just say, hey, by the way, I'm working on this hard project. This is one of the things. It's a way that we can build trust from the other way around, especially for the team members who may not want to open up. Where it's like, hey, I'm actually struggling with this decision. Do you want to help? Okay, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that I'd been on an action plan. I was 2 weeks from being terminated. This is not the kind of story you walk around telling generally. Like, this is like your dirty little secret, right? The fact that I cried in the parking lot when they gave me like, okay, in 10 days, you're out of here. And I had to have a moment of real introspection. But shockingly enough, every time I tell this story in person or, I talk about it on something like this, I get people reaching out who all of a sudden feel they can trust me. Like, I've been through something like that and it was so hard. And and this vulnerability invites trust. I think it breeds trust. And so your boss has got to understand why you want this, how it's going to benefit you, them, and the organization. And I think they've got to see that it's not a fad. It's not just, like I said, persistence means it's not a passing whim of, well, what's hard for you today, Jen? Oh, yeah, I'll never ask again. And I didn't really listen. So when they talk, you got to have a pen, you got to have a piece of paper, you got to be ready to take that seriously and like capture that fire and then throw a log on that fire, right? Because The little spark, you want it to turn into something that provides light and heat, the great things about fire.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other tactic that I picked up on, which I think is the one I was trying to remember before, was negative feedback in private. This is something that I advocate for, that praise in public, right? Absolutely positive feedback all over the place in public and in private. But the negative feedback, oftentimes the best place for that is in a private conversation. Unless it's like this situation where it's like, you need to call it out in that moment and other people are like, oh, wow, that was just, that was terrible. That was a terrible thing to say or do. I think those might be the exceptions. But I think that helps with that trust as well. And what's interesting, I think what you were telling about the story, that the two of you and your boss made it explicit that this is what we're going to talk about in public, and then this is what we're going to talk about in private. I think that often happens by accident, or there's like this unwritten silent handshake kind of thing that happens. Because when I think about relationships with my bosses, that like, wow, that's actually what we did. We didn't talk about it though, but by talking about it, I think that's a great step to actually just make it, put it out there, and then it's what we naturally are going to do anyway. It's gonna get better because of that. So I think that's an interesting aspect of it as well. Be explicit about your relationship and the trust that you're building and not building, and what you can do to continue to build that trust. Let's not pretend that it's something underneath the surface that we're never going to talk about.
I think my boss also really valued an open exchange of ideas, even when other people were around. So if we were in a team lead meeting, if we were in a meeting with the client and he asserted something, so we actually talked about this a little bit as well. And that's that idea of how do we disagree in a way that continues to support the relationship, especially when it's in public. And so I started really watching how he disagreed with other people. And I learned this marvelous technique. It was kind of like and it wasn't always disagreement. Sometimes it was just about getting to the deeper questions. There's a wonderful book called The Trusted Advisor by David Meister that describes this as the Columbo Method. And that's where you kind of cock your head and scratch your head and say, I may be a little slow here, Jen, but I'm trying to follow your logic. Could you lay it out one more time in small words for me? Or I think you're saying this, but this is also being said. Forgive the dumb question, aren't these two things at odds? And so he had a really brilliant way of bringing himself down where he could do this. Yeah. And was completely authentic, where every other leader in the room had to be puffed up. My boss's superpower was in getting to the real problem by being humble and admitting and I think sometimes he would use language like, sometimes English moves really fast, but are you saying, and I think it was a little bit of a ploy, whatever it takes. But basically we learned how to have what to other people might look like an active disagreement. And it was, but it was always built on a relationship of trust. There were places we wouldn't go. And if this was really something where we were completely disconnected, we would usually say, well, let's take it offline. But sure. He didn't want a yes man. Just to be clear, he never asked me to be that. He wanted me to push back on him in public, even with my ideas, because he felt that's where the best results came from.
Yeah. And I think
to talk about that. Yeah,
that's great. And I think that the Columbo thing may work for some people. It may not work for others, but I think the underlying strategy here is kind of being authentic. It sounds like that's who your boss was kind of anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just bringing that out a little bit more. Maybe there was a little bit of play acting going on, but as long as it was an authentic, it was like, this is actually what's going on in my head right now. And I'm going to slow down a little bit more than I normally might. And that bringing that sense of this is who I am. And also combined with that, opening up to the idea and having those conversations that there's never just one right way to do it. There's always at least one or two or three or five truths that people can kind of attach to. And hey, I hear your truth, but I'm wondering, I think I kind of look at it a different way.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
you open to looking at it this way too? Or has that ever, did you ever think about that? Or, those kinds of questions where it's not like you're wrong. It's just, hey, yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But gosh, golly gee, the English language, I love that. The English language is tough sometimes. So let's make sure we understand exactly what that word means, or it moves fast. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
And by the way, the first 5 years I saw him do this, he's so good at it. I thought this is just, well, at first, frankly, this is hard to say, but at first I thought he doesn't he doesn't understand that. But it wasn't until much later that I sort of understood that he was seeking additional clarification,
Yep.
rather than he wasn't really play acting, but he was
Okay.
using this tactic of humility and please explain it to me again, in order to further the conversation. I
Yeah.
think we've all been in those conversations, by the way, where everybody's talking in such abstract language. Maybe stop me if I'm wrong, but everybody's talking in such abstract businessy language that nothing is even really getting said, and certainly very little meaning is getting conveyed.
Yep.
And I appreciate it. He did not have a tolerance for that. He would just say, "I don't really understand what you're saying. Can you boil it down for me?"
Yeah. Yeah. There have been
All
times
right.
when I wanted to
Well,
say that. Yeah. Yeah.
Jen, I so appreciated our interview today. Thank you for having me on. If you want to be your boss's ally, please consider not only the benefits to you, the benefits to her as well, and also imagine the benefits of your team. Start by baby steps. Ask how you can help. Ask what challenges they're facing. Ask how can you help them be more successful, less stressed, enjoy life more, enjoy work more. Listen, make notes, and then slowly just act on those things. Ask to help. This does require that you are doing your job competently, that you aren't their biggest problem. Um, so I think if they say to you, well, I just really need you to do your job excellently, just focus on that, but continue to ask. I hope this has been useful for your listeners. And yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah,
Bye
yeah.
bye.
It was a pleasure to talk with you today, Marcus. And actually, so one thing that I wanted to add on, just so if you have 2 seconds, how can people find you online? Oh, it looks like Marcus had to leave. So we'll definitely get some ways for Marcus to share. So thanks everyone to share where to find him online. So thanks everyone for watching today. Take care.